She was 34, stunning, and standing in my driveway with her hand on my husband's chest. Let's be honest, Claudette. You married up and you know it. Raymond deserves someone who brings something to the table. I watched her designer lips curl into a smirk, her confidence absolute. My husband couldn't even look at me. That's when I decided to tell her the truth Raymond had been too embarrassed to admit for 15 years. Every dollar he'd spent on her came from my fortune, not his. Before we dive into this story, I need you to do something for me. Drop a comment right now and tell me where you're watching from, your city, your country, wherever you are in the world. And please hit that like button for me right now and subscribe to my channel. We're building a community of people who refuse to be silenced, who know that dignity has no expiration date. Now back to my story. My name is Claudette Brennan. I'm 58 years old and I own 18 commercial office buildings across 3 states. My portfolio is worth $180 million, and I built every single dollar of it with my own 2 hands. No inheritance, no lottery, no rich husband bankrolling my dreams. Just me, a warehouse nobody wanted, and a vision nobody believed in when I was 27 years old and angry enough to prove the world wrong. That woman in my driveway? Her name was Amber, 34, stunning in that effortless way that costs a fortune in maintenance, wearing sunglasses that probably cost more than most people's rent, and she was about to teach me a lesson she thought I needed to learn. "Let's be honest, Claudette," she said, her voice dripping with the kind of confidence that only comes from never being told no. "You married up and you know it. Raymond deserves someone who brings something to the table." I watched her designer lips curl into a smirk. The morning sun caught the diamonds in her ears, the ones I'd later discover my husband bought her with my credit card. She shifted her weight, moving closer to Raymond, claiming him with her body language the way you'd mark territory. And Raymond, my husband of 15 years, couldn't even look at me. His eyes were fixed somewhere over my left shoulder, like if he didn't make eye contact, this wasn't really happening. Something ice cold slid down my spine in that moment. Not panic, not even rage yet. Just this crystalline clarity that comes when your brain finally accepts what your gut has been screaming for months. I'd been living in a carefully constructed lie, and it was about to shatter spectacularly. But I'm getting ahead of myself. You need to understand how I got here, to this driveway, to this woman, to this moment where everything I thought I knew was about to combust. Because this story, it doesn't start with betrayal. It starts 31 years earlier, with a different version of me who was hungry, in a way these people would never understand. I was 27 when I walked into that abandoned warehouse on the east side. My boots crunched on broken glass, and I could hear rats scurrying in the walls. The real estate agent, this sleazy guy named Derek with a comb-over and desperation in his eyes, he kept trying to steer me toward more appropriate properties, smaller, prettier, less ambitious. But I'd done my research. I knew the city was rezoning this entire district. I knew tech companies were starting to eye this area for office space, and I knew that everyone else saw an eyesore while I saw a gold mine. "Look, sweetheart," Derek said, and I felt my jaw clench at that word. "This is a big project. You sure you don't want to start with something more manageable?" I turned to face him in that gutted space, surrounded by the corpse of someone else's failed dream, and I made him a promise. "In 5 years, you're going to drive past this building and kick yourself for doubting me. In 10 years, you won't be able to afford a property in this neighborhood. And in 15 years, you'll tell people you discovered me, even though you spent this entire meeting trying to talk me out of the only good instinct you've ever had." I bought the warehouse with every penny I had and a loan that made my accountant physically ill. For the next 8 months, I worked that property like my life depended on it, because it did. I was there at 6 in the morning in a business suit and work boots, reviewing contractor quotes. I scrubbed floors. I negotiated with suppliers who thought a woman my age didn't know the difference between load-bearing walls and drywall. I presented to investors who spent more time staring at my legs than my projections. But here's what they didn't understand. I'd grown up watching my father lose everything in a bad business deal. I watched my mother's face as we moved from a 4-bedroom house to a 2-bedroom apartment to a single room in my aunt's basement. I learned early that security was something you built yourself, brick by brick, because trusting someone else to provide it was a luxury I couldn't afford. The warehouse sold 18 months later for 3 times what I paid. I cried when I signed those papers, actually cried, because it was proof. Proof that I could do this. Proof that I wasn't crazy. Proof that my instincts were worth betting on. I didn't stop. By the time I was 32, I owned 5 buildings. At 38, I had 12. At 45, I hit 18 properties and crossed the $100 million mark. Every single one of those buildings has a story, a negotiation where someone underestimated me, a risk everyone said was too dangerous, a moment where I had to choose between playing it safe and playing to win. But success has a price nobody tells you about. I had a luxury condo overlooking the water, filled with expensive furniture and expensive art, and an expensive silence that echoed off the walls at night. I had business awards gathering dust on shelves. I had a calendar packed with meetings and networking events and conference calls. What I didn't have was someone to come home to, someone who looked at me and saw Claudette, not Claudette Brennan, real estate mogul, just Claudette, the woman who still couldn't keep a houseplant alive, who sang off-key in the shower, who sometimes ate cereal for dinner because she was too tired to cook. My mother used to call every Sunday. "Success is cold comfort at night, Claudie," she'd say, and I'd laugh it off. Tell her I was too busy building an empire to worry about romance. Tell her that love was for people who had time for complications. But late at night, in that beautiful empty condo, I'd wonder if she was right. If I'd built a fortress so impenetrable that I'd locked myself inside it. That's the state I was in when I met Raymond. I was 43, standing in a gallery at some charity art opening I'd been dragged to by my friend Diana. I was uncomfortable in my cocktail dress, counting down the minutes until I could politely leave, when this man approached me, tall, silver at the temples in that distinguished way, wearing a perfectly tailored suit that suggested wealth without screaming it. "The Rothko or the Kandinsky, Dama?" he asked, gesturing at 2 abstract pieces on the wall. I blinked. Most men at these events either wanted to pitch me an investment opportunity or prove they knew more about business than I did. Nobody asked about art. "The Rothko," I said carefully. "The emotional resonance is more immediate." His face lit up. "Exactly. Kandinsky intellectualizes emotion. Rothko just drops you into the feeling and lets you drown." Then he extended his hand. "Raymond Chen." We talked for 2 hours. Not about my properties or his portfolio or the market or any of the usual networking garbage. We talked about color theory and poetry and whether abstract art was a cop-out or the purest form of expression. He quoted Rilke. He made me laugh with a story about his disastrous attempt to paint in college. And when he asked about my work, he actually listened, leaned in, asked follow-up questions, seemed genuinely fascinated by the challenge of transforming industrial spaces into modern offices. "I've always believed powerful women are the most fascinating," he said at one point, and something in my chest unclenched, because he didn't say it like a fetish or a challenge. He said it like a simple fact, the way you'd comment on the weather. I went home that night and stared at my phone, waiting for him to text, feeling like a teenager, feeling ridiculous, feeling alive in a way I hadn't in years. He texted the next morning. "Coffee. I promised to only quote 1 dead poet per hour." We dated for 8 months, and it felt like falling into warm water. Raymond was charming, cultured, attentive in ways I didn't know I'd been starving for. He brought me books he thought I'd like. He remembered tiny details from conversations, my favorite coffee order, that I hated surprise parties, that I'd always wanted to visit Barcelona. When I had a brutal negotiation that fell through, he showed up at my office with takeout and just listened while I vented for an hour. He talked about his work in vague terms. Finance consulting was the phrase he used most. When I pressed for details, he'd wave it off. "It's boring portfolio management stuff. Nothing as exciting as what you do." And I'd accepted that because I was so damn grateful to talk about something other than cap rates and tenant improvement allowances for once in my adult life. There were moments, tiny red flags I ignored because I wanted this to work so badly. Once, when we were discussing moving in together, my accountant asked for his financial disclosure, standard procedure before blending any assets. Raymond got defensive. "You think I'm after your money?" he'd asked, and he looked so hurt that I immediately felt guilty. No, it's just protocol," I'd stammered. "I do this with any significant—" "I thought what we had was different," he'd said quietly. "I thought you saw me as a partner, not a potential liability." I'd backed down, told my accountant to skip the deep dive, because I didn't want to be the woman who led with suspicion. I didn't want my success to poison something real. We got married at a small ceremony overlooking the coast. It was beautiful, intimate, meaningful, exactly what I wanted. Raymond cried during his vows, told me I was the most remarkable woman he'd ever met, that he felt honored to build a life with me. And I believed him because I needed to believe that someone could love me for me, not despite my success or because of it, but just because. The first year was good, great, even. Raymond was attentive, appreciative, seemed genuinely happy. He'd cook dinner sometimes, simple things, but I appreciated the effort. He'd rub my shoulders after long days. He'd ask about my projects and actually remember the details. When he suggested joining the country club for networking, I didn't think twice about paying for the membership. When he wanted to upgrade his car because his old sedan didn't project the right image for client meetings, I understood. Professional appearance matters, but things shifted so gradually, I didn't notice the pattern until years later. Raymond started traveling more for work. Building the client base, he'd explain. He needed new suits. Clients expected a certain level of polish. He picked up expensive hobbies, golf lessons at the club, wine collecting, a sports car he bought for weekend networking events. Every expense came with a justification that seemed reasonable in isolation, and I paid for all of it, not because he demanded it, but because it seemed natural. I made more. I had more. Sharing resources in a marriage was normal, right? He was always grateful, always appreciative. "I don't know what I did to deserve you," he'd say, kissing my forehead. And I'd feel warm, valued, secure in the knowledge that my success wasn't threatening our relationship. What I didn't know, what I was so carefully, deliberately blind to, was that Raymond's finance consulting brought in about $70,000 a year, total, while I was generating millions. While I was funding a lifestyle that cost $300,000 annually, while I was paying for everything from the mortgage on our waterfront home, to the groceries, to his mistress's apartment. But I'm getting ahead of myself again, because for 13 years I lived in blissful ignorance. I worked 70-hour weeks building my empire. Raymond worked his consulting job and enjoyed the fruits of my labor, and I genuinely believed we were partners, that we were happy, that I'd finally found someone who loved me for more than my bank account. The cracks started showing in year 14. Raymond became more critical. Little comments about my appearance. "You're beautiful as you are. So natural," he'd say. And it sounded like a compliment until I realized what he meant was, "You look old. You should do something about that." He started comparing me to other wives at the country club. "Did you see what Jennifer did with her hair? Very flattering." He'd comment on my clothes. "Is that what you're wearing to the gala? It's a bit severe, don't you think?" I started noticing other things too. He was on his phone constantly. He'd take calls in other rooms, lowering his voice. He started working late more frequently. When I'd reach for him in bed, he'd claim exhaustion. The man who used to quote poetry at me couldn't meet my eyes during dinner. And then, 6 months ago, his phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. Raymond was in the shower. I was making coffee, enjoying a rare Saturday morning at home, when his screen lit up. I wasn't snooping. The notification just appeared right there in front of me. "Amber with a heart emoji. Can't wait until you're free of that old battle axe." My hand froze halfway to the coffee pot. I stared at those words until they burned themselves into my retinas. Old battle axe. I read it again, then again. Like if I read it enough times, it might say something different. I picked up his phone. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped it. No passcode. He'd removed it months ago after I questioned why he suddenly needed one. "I've nothing to hide from you," he'd said. Turns out that was a lie wrapped in a truth, because what he had to hide was so extensive that a passcode would have just been suspicious. I opened the messages. The first few were recent, that morning actually. Amber complaining about having to wait another week to see him. Raymond reassuring her that soon they'd be together full time. Then I scrolled up, and up, and up. 8 months of messages, 8 months of my husband living a completely separate life with a woman named Amber who thought she was his future. But it was worse than just the affair. So much worse. Amber, at least she'll have her buildings to keep her warm. Raymond, soon, baby. She's aging out anyway. You're my real future. Amber, I still can't believe you put up with her for so long. But once you leave her, we can finally live the life you built. The life you built. I had to read that line 3 times before the full horror of it landed. Amber thought Raymond was successful. Amber thought Raymond had built something. Amber had no idea that every dollar he spent on her came from my accounts, my properties, my decades of work. There were more messages. Hundreds. Photos of them together at restaurants I'd never been to, restaurants I was paying for, screenshots of jewelry he'd bought her, jewelry that appeared on my credit card statements, long conversations planning their future together in a condo he was supposedly investing in. A condo I'd later discover was being paid for with automatic withdrawals from our joint account. But the cruelest messages were the ones where they mocked me, my age, my masculine approach to business. The fact that I didn't get Botox or fillers, my lack of interest in fashion. They'd created this entire narrative where I was the aging career woman who'd trapped a successful younger man. Never mind that Raymond was only 4 years younger than me, and he was finally breaking free to be with someone who appreciated him. I stood in my kitchen, in my house, that I bought, reading these messages while my husband showered upstairs, and something fundamental broke inside me. Not my heart, exactly. That would come later. What broke in that moment was my willingness to be small, my willingness to pretend I didn't see what was right in front of me, my willingness to let other people write my story. The shower stopped. I heard Raymond moving around upstairs, and I made a decision that would change everything. I didn't confront him. Not yet. Instead, I took screenshots, every single message, every photo, every credit card receipt I could find in his email. I sent them all to a cloud drive he didn't have access to. Then I put his phone back exactly where I found it, finished making my coffee, and waited. When Raymond came downstairs, damp and smiling, I kissed him good morning like nothing had changed. "Good shower?" I asked. "Perfect," he said, pouring himself coffee. "What do you want to do today?" I watched him move around our kitchen, my kitchen, so comfortable, so entitled to this life I'd built, and I felt something cold and sharp crystallize in my chest. "Actually," I said slowly, "I'm thinking of meeting Diana for lunch. You have plans?" He hesitated for just a fraction of a second. "Just some work stuff this afternoon. You know how it is." I knew exactly how it was. He was going to see Amber. He was going to spend my money on another woman, then come home and lie to my face about it. "Of course," I said, smiling. "Work stuff. I get it." That Monday, I called Michael Chen, a private investigator who'd done background checks for some of my property deals. "Michael," I said, sitting in my office with the door locked, "I need everything. I need to know where my husband goes, who he sees, what he's spending money on, and what he's told his mistress about me." There was a pause. "Claudette, are you sure you want—" "I'm sure," I cut him off. "And Michael, I'm not looking for ammunition for a divorce. I'm looking for absolute, irrefutable truth. I want to know exactly what I'm dealing with before I decide what to do about it." He was quiet for a moment. Then, Okay, give me 4 weeks. Those 4 weeks were the longest of my life. I went to work every day, closed deals, managed properties, attended meetings, all while watching my husband move through our house like a ghost. Every smile felt like a lie. Every "I love you" felt like theft. But I didn't flinch, didn't crack, didn't give him any reason to suspect I knew. I'd spent 30 years building an empire by being patient, strategic, and absolutely ruthless when necessary. I could do this too. When Michael finally called me back, I met him at a coffee shop across town. He slid a manila folder across the table, and I noticed his hand was shaking slightly. "Claudette," he said quietly, "I've been doing this job for 20 years. I've seen a lot of ugly divorces. But this, you need to prepare yourself." I opened the folder. The first page was a financial breakdown. Raymond's actual income, $73,000 last year from sporadic consulting work. His net worth, approximately $50,000 plus outstanding student loans from an MBA program I'd never known he took. His spending over the last year, $320,000, all from accounts I funded. The second page was about Amber, 34 years old, working as a social media influencer with modest success. And here's the kicker. She thought Raymond was a hedge fund manager worth $50 million. He'd been lying to her as thoroughly as he'd been lying to me. But it got worse. So much worse. Page 3 was a timeline of his business trips over the last 8 months, every single one spent with Amber in hotels I'd paid for. Page 4 was a credit card statement highlighting purchases, jewelry, dinners, a car lease in her name. Page 5 was a rental agreement for an apartment at 1440 Harborview, $4,500 a month, auto-debited from our joint account. I stared at that address. "Michael," I said slowly, "how much from 1440 Harborview?" He nodded, understanding dawning in his eyes. "That's one of your buildings." I started laughing. Actually laughing right there in that coffee shop, because the absurdity was too much. My husband was renting an apartment for his mistress in a building I owned. I was literally his mistress's landlord. "There's more," Michael said, and his expression told me I wouldn't like it. He pulled out another document, screenshots from Amber's social media, carefully curated to show her power couple life. Photos of her and Raymond at expensive restaurants with captions like, "Finally found a real man who knows how to provide," and "When he surprises you with jewelry just because honor and blessed charm power couple." Every single one of those posts was a lie funded by my money, but the worst document was at the bottom of the folder. A series of text messages between Raymond and someone named Marcus, apparently his college roommate. In these messages, Raymond was surprisingly honest. Marcus: "Dude, when are you going to tell Amber the truth?" Raymond: "Why would I? She thinks I'm successful. Claudette knows I'm not. Why can't I have one person who looks at me with respect?" Marcus: "You're literally spending Claudette's money on another woman. That's beyond messed up." Raymond: "It's our money. We're married. And honestly, she emasculates me every day just by existing. This is my compensation for living in her shadow." I read those words until they stopped making sense as language and just became shapes on paper. My compensation for living in her shadow, as if being married to me was some kind of hardship that entitled him to betray me. I closed the folder. Looked at Michael. What else? He pulled out one more thing, a recorded conversation from 3 weeks earlier. Raymond and Amber at dinner, caught by a recording device Michael had planted in Raymond's car. I put in the earbuds, and I listened to my husband tell another woman that I was cold, controlling, and incapable of real intimacy, that I'd bought our relationship rather than building it, that he'd wasted 15 years of his life with someone who valued spreadsheets over human connection, that he couldn't wait to be free. When the recording ended, I sat in that coffee shop for a long time, just breathing. Michael waited patiently. Finally, I spoke. "He's planning to leave me." "Yes," Michael confirmed, "based on the messages he's building up to it." probably waiting for the right moment to make his exit look like your fault. Does he know about the prenup? I'd insisted on one before we married, one of the few smart decisions I'd made. Michael nodded. He's consulted with a lawyer. They're trying to find a loophole, something about properties refinanced during the marriage possibly being considered marital assets. Of course he wasn't just going to leave. He was going to try to take something with him. I gathered the documents, thanked Michael, and went home. Raymond wasn't there, probably with Amber, spending my money, laughing about the old woman he was about to dump. I walked through our house, seeing it with new eyes. This space I'd thought was ours was really just mine, inhabited by a parasite who'd been feeding off me for 15 years, while secretly despising me for it. That night, I called my lawyer. I need you to file divorce papers, immediately, and I need you to prepare for him to contest the prenup. Claudette, my lawyer said carefully, before we proceed, you should know this is going to get ugly. Good, I said. I'm tired of pretty lies. The papers were filed within 48 hours, but I didn't serve them immediately, because 3 weeks later, Raymond came to me with a nervous energy I recognized from our early dating days. Claudette, he said, I need to talk to you about something. I looked up from my laptop, perfectly calm. Of course. What's up? He swallowed hard. I've been doing a lot of thinking about us, about our future, and I think we need to have an honest conversation about whether this marriage is working. I waited, letting him hang himself with his own words. The thing is, he continued, gaining confidence, Amber wants to meet you. She thinks it would be mature for all of us to talk, to handle this like adults. And there it was, the trap I'd been waiting for him to walk into. Amber, I repeated slowly. Your mistress wants to meet me. He flinched at the word mistress. It's not like that. We've developed feelings. When? I asked, my voice like ice. When what? When would she like to meet me? To have this mature conversation about you leaving your wife for a woman you've been funding with your wife's money. The color drained from his face. You know. Saturday, I said, ignoring his statement. Tell her to come Saturday morning, 10 a.m. I'll make coffee. Raymond stared at me like I'd grown a second head. You want her to come here? You wanted mature and honest, I said, turning back to my laptop. So let's be mature and honest. All three of us. Saturday at 10. Don't be late. After he left the room, probably to call Amber in a panic, I sat at my desk and smiled for the first time in weeks. Because they wanted a confrontation. They wanted honesty. I was about to give them more truth than they could handle. Saturday morning came with cruel sunshine. I woke up early, dressed in the most expensive but understated outfit I owned, a subtle reminder of the wealth they'd both been exploiting. I made coffee, set out pastries I knew neither of them would eat, and I waited. Raymond was pacing in the living room, checking his phone every 30 seconds. He looked like he might throw up, and I felt nothing but cold satisfaction. At 9:58, a sleek black car pulled into the driveway, and out stepped Amber. She was exactly as I'd imagined from the photos, polished, confident, wearing designer everything like armor. She took a moment to survey the house, and I saw calculation in her eyes, determining value, measuring what she thought she was about to take. I watched from the window as she walked up to Raymond, watched her hand slide onto his chest in a gesture of ownership, watched him lean into her touch like a man drowning reaching for a life raft. And then I heard her voice carry through the open window. Let's be honest, Claudette. You married up and you know it. Raymond deserves someone who brings something to the table. I took a deep breath, picked up my phone where I had my lawyer on speed dial, and walked outside to meet my husband's mistress. This was going to be interesting. I invited them inside. That's the part that seemed to confuse them most. The calm invitation, the steady voice, the complete absence of tears or hysterics or whatever performance they'd been expecting from the aging wife, about to be discarded. Amber's perfectly shaped eyebrows drew together in suspicion, and Raymond looked like he might actually pass out on my doorstep, but they followed me into the house. Into my house, the one I bought 6 years before I ever met Raymond, though I'm sure he'd conveniently forgotten that detail when he was painting himself as the successful provider to his mistress. "Coffee?" I asked, gesturing to the spread I'd laid out in the living room. My voice was pleasant. Hostess perfect, the tone I used for business negotiations when I was about to destroy someone's position so thoroughly they wouldn't see it coming until the contracts were already signed. Amber settled onto my couch, my $12,000 Italian leather couch that I'd had shipped from Milan, and crossed her legs with the confidence of someone who believed she'd already won. She was younger than me, obviously, prettier in that manufactured way that requires a team of professionals and a monthly budget most people don't spend on rent. But there was something desperate in the way she touched Raymond's arm, the way she kept glancing at him for reassurance. She needed this victory, needed it in a way that made her dangerous and pathetic in equal measure. Raymond stood near the window, his body language screaming discomfort. Unable to meet my eyes. Good. He should be uncomfortable. He should feel every second of this, like glass, under his skin. "So," I said, pouring coffee with hands that didn't shake even a little, "Amber, Raymond tells me you wanted to have a mature conversation about the future. I appreciate the directness. I've always believed in handling things head on." She leaned forward, and I could see her mentally preparing her speech, the one she'd probably rehearsed in the mirror, the one where she'd explain, kindly, generously, why Raymond deserved better than me. "Claudette," she began, her voice syrupy with false sympathy, "I know this must be hard for you, but Raymond and we've fallen in love, and I think, if we're all being honest, you had to know this marriage wasn't working." "Did I?" I asked, sitting across from them and taking a delicate sip of coffee. "Tell me what gave you that impression." She exchanged a look with Raymond, drawing strength from his presence. "Raymond's been unhappy for years. He's told me everything, how you control every aspect of his life with your money, how you make him feel small, how you're more interested in your buildings than your husband." I nodded slowly, as if considering this. "That's interesting. And you believe you can make him happy in ways I couldn't?" "I bring something to the relationship beyond a bank account," she said, and there it was, the knife she thought would cut deepest. "I'm a partner, not a benefactor. Raymond deserves to be with someone who sees him as an equal." The word equal hung in the air between us, and I felt something dark and satisfied unfurl in my chest. Because this was it. This was the moment I'd been waiting for, the moment where I got to watch their entire constructed reality crumble into dust. "Amber," I said softly, "before we continue with this conversation, I think there's something you should know, something Raymond should have told you a long time ago, but apparently chose not to." I pulled out my phone, opened a folder, and slid it across the coffee table. "What exactly did Raymond tell you about his financial situation?" She blinked, confused by the shift. "He's a hedge fund manager. His portfolio is worth $50 million. Why does that—" "Stop, Sam," I said, and something in my tone made her mouth snap shut. "Raymond, do you want to tell her, or should I?" The color had completely drained from my husband's face. He looked like a man watching a building collapse in slow motion, knowing he was about to be crushed but unable to move. "Claudette, please, no," I cut him off, my voice sharp as a blade. "You wanted mature and honest. You wanted all of us to have a conversation. Let's have one. Let's talk about truth, Raymond. Let's talk about all those truths you forgot to mention." I turned back to Amber, who was now looking between us with growing alarm. "Amber, my husband is not a hedge fund manager. He's a finance consultant who makes approximately $70,000 a year from sporadic freelance work. His net worth is roughly $50,000, and that's being generous because I'm not counting his student loans." She laughed, actually laughed like I'd told a joke. "That's ridiculous. I've seen his lifestyle." "We've been to restaurants I paid for," I finished calmly. Hotels I paid for. You're wearing earrings he bought you with my credit card. That car he leases for you. My account. The apartment at 1440 Harbor View, where you two have your little romantic rendezvous. I paused, watching her face. That's my building, Amber. I own it. You've been living in a property I own, in an apartment I'm paying for, sleeping with a man I'm funding, all while calling me a gold digger. The silence that followed was exquisite. Amber's face went through a fascinating series of expressions: confusion, disbelief, dawning horror, rage. She turned to Raymond, and I watched in real time as she recalculated every moment of their relationship through this new lens. "Tell me she's lying," Amber whispered, but there was no conviction in it. She already knew. Raymond opened his mouth, closed it, tried again. "It's not. Yes, technically Claudette has more money, but we're married, so it's our money." $180 million, I said conversationally. "That's my net worth, Amber. Not his, not ours, mine. I built a commercial real estate empire from a single property flip when I was 27 years old. Every building, every dollar, every single asset that Raymond has been using to impress you, I earned it. He's been playing millionaire with my money while telling you he was the successful one." Amber stood up so fast she knocked over her coffee cup. The dark liquid spread across my expensive rug, and I didn't even flinch. I'd already planned to replace it anyway. "You lied to me," she said to Raymond, her voice shaking. "You lied to me. About everything." "I was going to tell you," he said weakly, and I almost laughed at the sheer pathetic nature of that defense. I needed you to see me for who I was, not what I had. What you had." Amber's voice was rising now, that polished veneer cracking. "You don't have anything. I told my friends about you. I told my family. I turned down a marriage proposal from a man who actually owns 3 car dealerships because you told me." She stopped, her hands going to her mouth. And there it was, the other victim in Raymond's long con. Because I could see it now, in the way Amber's shoulders shook, in the way her voice broke. She genuinely believed she'd found her future. She'd turned down real opportunities for a fantasy Raymond had sold her, just like I'd wasted 15 years on the fantasy he'd sold me. But I couldn't afford sympathy. Not yet. Not when I still had so much more to reveal. "Amber," I said quietly, and she turned to look at me with mascara starting to run down her cheeks. "I'm sorry. I genuinely am. But you should also know, you weren't the first." Raymond made a sound like he'd been punched in the stomach. "Claudette, don't." "I hired a private investigator," I continued, ignoring him. "You've been together 8 months, but there were others before you. At least 2 that I know of. Raymond has been systematically cheating on me for nearly 3 years, always with younger women, always funding the relationships with my money, always painting himself as the successful one who was trapped with the cold career woman." The room felt like it was vibrating with tension. Amber sank back onto the couch, her face in her hands. Raymond looked like he wanted the floor to open up and swallow him whole. And me? I felt nothing but cold, crystalline clarity. This was business. This was just another negotiation where I held all the cards, and they were about to learn exactly what that meant. "I've already filed for divorce," I said, my voice matter of fact. "The papers will be served tomorrow. We have a prenuptial agreement that specifies exactly what you get, Raymond. Nothing. Well, not nothing. You get to keep whatever assets you brought into the marriage. So that $50,000, that's all yours, but everything else, this house, the cars, the country club membership, the credit cards, the joint accounts, those all end today." Raymond finally found his voice. "You can't do that. We're married. We have shared property." "We have a prenup," I corrected. "One you signed 15 years ago after my lawyer insisted on it. Remember? You were so offended. You told me it hurt that I didn't trust you. You made me feel guilty for protecting my assets, but I insisted, and you signed, and now that piece of paper is going to ensure you leave this marriage with exactly what you deserve." "My lawyer says we can contest it," Raymond said, and there was something ugly in his voice now. The mask was completely off. Properties that were refinanced during the marriage become marital assets. You refinanced 3 buildings while we were together. That means I'm entitled to the appreciation in value. That's 15, maybe $20 million. So there it was, the real endgame. He wasn't just leaving me for Amber. He was planning to rob me on his way out the door. I smiled, actually smiled, and I saw fear flicker in his eyes. You're absolutely right. I did refinance 3 properties during our marriage, and your lawyer, let me guess, Martin Fisher from Fisher and Associates, he probably told you that creates an argument for marital property rights. Smart man, Martin. Expensive, too. I'm curious how you're planning to pay his retainer, considering I'm closing all joint accounts today, and you have maybe $8,000 in your personal checking. Raymond's face went white. You've been planning this. I've been protecting myself, I corrected. There's a difference. You were planning a betrayal. I was preparing for one. You see, Raymond, the problem with your strategy is that it relies on me being the naive woman you thought I was. The woman who'd just sign whatever papers you put in front of her because she was too embarrassed about her failing marriage to fight back. But I'm not that woman. I'm the woman who built an empire by anticipating every possible outcome and preparing for the worst. And you're the worst. Amber was watching this exchange like a spectator at a car crash, unable to look away. And I could see the calculations happening behind her eyes too, because this wasn't just about the money anymore. This was about 2 people who'd built their entire relationship on a foundation of lies, and now those lies were collapsing and threatening to bury them both. I turned down Jake for you, Amber said again, softer now, more to herself than to us. Jake owned 3 car dealerships. Jake was 42 and divorced, and actually honest about his assets. But I thought you were better. I thought you were going somewhere. I told everyone I'd found a real power player. You found a parasite, I said bluntly. We both did. The difference is, I fed mine for 15 years before I realized what he was. You're learning after 8 months. That's not nothing, Amber. You can still recover from this. She looked up at me, and I saw something like understanding pass between us. We were both Raymond's marks. Both of us thought we were getting something real. Both of us were just funding his ego with our time, our energy, our belief in who he pretended to be. But then her face hardened again. This is your fault too, she spat. If you'd been a better wife, if you'd made him feel like a man instead of just another acquisition, maybe he wouldn't have needed to look elsewhere. And there it was. The thing I'd been waiting for. The thing Raymond had clearly been telling her to justify his behavior. Let me ask you something, Amber, I said, leaning forward. Do you know what Raymond does when he feels emasculated? He spends money he didn't earn. He buys things he can't afford. He creates an illusion of success by borrowing someone else's power. Is that what you want in a partner? Someone whose sense of masculinity is so fragile that the only way he can feel like a man is by tearing down the woman who supports him? That's not, Raymond started. Shut up, Amber and I said simultaneously. And in any other circumstance, that moment of unity would have been funny. I turned my full attention to my husband. You want to know what emasculated you, Raymond? Not my success, not my money, not my strength. What emasculated you was your own inadequacy, your own inability to be honest about who you are and what you bring to a relationship. I never asked you to match my income. I never demanded you build an empire. I just wanted a partner, someone who showed up honestly, who contributed in their own way, who loved me for more than what I could provide. But you couldn't even do that. You had to lie. To me, to Amber, probably to yourself most of all. You don't know what it's like, Raymond said, and his voice cracked. Everyone knows you're Claudette Brennan. Everyone knows your net worth, your properties, your success. And me? I'm just Mr. Brennan. Raymond Chen doesn't exist anymore. I'm just an appendage to your empire. Do you know what that does to a man? It does nothing, I said coldly. Unless that man's entire sense of self is built on being more successful than the woman beside him. You could have built your own thing, Raymond. You could have been proud of what you actually accomplished instead of pretending to be something you're not. But instead, you chose to steal my achievements and wear them like a costume while resenting me for making you feel small. Your inadequacy isn't my burden to manage. The truth of those words seemed to hit him like a physical blow. He sank into a chair, his head in his hands. I loved you, he said weakly. At first, I really did love you. Maybe, I acknowledged. But love without respect is just another form of using someone, and you didn't respect me enough, to be honest. About your finances, about your feelings, about the other women. You respect what I built, but you despise me for building it. That's not love, Raymond. That's resentment wearing a mask. Amber was silent now, watching this confrontation with something like fascination. And I wondered what she was thinking. Was she seeing her own future in Raymond's words? Was she understanding that if he'd treat me this way after 15 years, he'd eventually treat her the same way? Or was she still convinced that she was different, special, the one who could somehow fix him? There's one more thing, I said, pulling out another document from the folder I'd prepared. Raymond, do you remember your friend Marcus, your college roommate? His head snapped up. What about Marcus? I have text messages between you two from about 6 weeks ago, where you explicitly told him that you were using Amber to boost your ego. That sleeping with her made you feel powerful in a way your marriage didn't. That you planned to leave me, take whatever money you could squeeze out of the divorce, and then see where things went with Amber. But you weren't sure you'd actually stay with her long term. Amber's gasp was audible. Show me. I handed her my phone, watched her read the messages, watched her face cycle through every variation of betrayal. Because Raymond hadn't just lied about his finances, he'd lied about his intentions, about his love for her, about everything. You were never going to leave her for me, Amber said, her voice barely above a whisper. I was just, what? A distraction? An ego boost? Amber, that's not. Those messages are out of context. Still not sure if I'm ready to commit to Amber long term, she read aloud. She's fun and makes me feel good about myself, but I don't know if she's more than a transition. Maybe I'll just stay single after the divorce, enjoy the freedom. That's what you told Marcus 2 months into our relationship. The silence that followed felt like it had weight to it, pressing down on all of us. Raymond had no defense left, no charm, no excuses, no carefully constructed lies that could paper over what he'd done. He'd betrayed both of us so thoroughly that there was nothing left but the raw, ugly truth of who he actually was. A weak man, a dishonest man, a man who used people and discarded them when they stopped serving his needs. Amber stood up, grabbed her purse, and walked toward the door. She paused on the threshold and looked back at me. I'm sorry, she said, and she actually sounded like she meant it. I said terrible things to you. I believed terrible things about you. I was so sure you were the villain in this story. We're all the villain in someone else's story, I said quietly. But you're not the villain in mine, Amber. He is. I gestured at Raymond, who looked smaller somehow, diminished by his own exposure. The only advice I'll give you, find that man with the car dealerships. Find someone who tells you the truth even when it's unflattering. Find someone whose love doesn't require you to be less than you are, so they can feel like more. She nodded, tears streaming down her face now, and left. I heard her car start, heard the gravel crunch as she pulled away, and then it was just me and Raymond in the wreckage of our marriage. Claudette, he began, but I held up a hand. Stop. Just stop. I don't want to hear more justifications or explanations or apologies that mean nothing. I want you to pack your things and be out of this house by tomorrow evening. I want you to understand that every credit card in your wallet will be declined as of 6 p.m. today. I want you to know that the legal battle you're planning, it's going to cost you everything you have and then some, because I have better lawyers, more resources, and absolutely no mercy left for you. Where am I supposed to go? He asked, and the entitlement in that question made me want to scream. That's not my problem anymore, I said. You're a 54-year-old man with a college degree and years of consulting experience. Figure it out. Maybe get a real job instead of playing millionaire with someone else's money." He stood up. And for a moment I thought he might try to touch me, to appeal to whatever softness he thought might still exist in me. But something in my expression must have stopped him. "I did love you," he said one more time. "I know you don't believe that now, but I did." "You loved what I could give you," I corrected. "My money, my status, my ability to make you feel important by association. But you never loved me, Raymond. Because if you had, you couldn't have done this. If you had, you would have seen me as a person instead of just a resource to exploit." He left without another word. I heard him go upstairs, heard drawers opening and closing, heard the sounds of him packing a bag, and I sat in my living room, my beautiful living room in my beautiful house that I built with my own hands and my own mind, and waited to feel something. Grief, maybe. Relief, anger, satisfaction. But all I felt was tired, bone deep, soul deep tired. The kind of exhaustion that comes from carrying something heavy for so long that you forget what it feels like to move freely. My phone buzzed. A text from my friend Diana. "How did it go?" I looked at the question for a long moment before responding. "It's done. They're both gone. I won." But even as I typed those words, I wondered, what exactly had I won? The right to be alone in a big house with my money and my pride intact. The satisfaction of watching two people who'd wronged me face consequences for their actions. The knowledge that I'd protected my assets and my empire. None of that felt like winning. It just felt like surviving. Raymond came back downstairs 20 minutes later with a duffel bag and a face full of resentment. "You didn't have to humiliate me like that," he said. "You could have just told me you knew. We could have handled this privately." "You humiliated yourself," I replied. "I just refused to pretend I didn't notice. There's a difference." "You're going to regret this," he said, and there was something venomous in his tone now. "People are going to know what you did, how you controlled me, how you emasculated me. I'm going to make sure everyone understands what kind of woman you really are." I stood up, walked over to him, and looked him directly in the eyes. "Go ahead. Tell everyone I'm a controlling bitch who used her money to dominate her poor, helpless husband. Tell them I drove you to cheat because I was too successful. Tell them whatever story makes you feel better about what you did. But know this, every person you tell will also learn that you're a liar, a cheat, and a fraud. They'll learn you spent 15 years living off a woman you claimed to love while secretly resenting her. They'll learn you tried to steal from me on your way out. So yes, please tell everyone. I'm very curious to see how that works out for you." He left, finally, and I locked the door behind him, set the alarm, and stood in my foyer wondering who I was now that I wasn't Raymond's wife anymore. The house felt different, lighter somehow, despite the weight of everything that had just happened. I walked through the rooms, remembering. Here was where we'd hosted our anniversary party 3 years ago. Raymond, charming, and attentive with my credit card funding every detail. There was the dining room where we'd eaten 1,000 meals in increasingly strained silence. Upstairs was the bedroom where we'd stopped touching each other years before the affair, both of us pretending everything was fine. This house was full of ghosts, but they were leaving with Raymond, and tomorrow I'd start the process of making this space mine again, really mine. Not a stage set for someone else's performance of success. Not a museum to a failed marriage, just mine. My phone rang. My lawyer. "Claudette, I heard from Raymond's attorney. They're definitely planning to contest the prenup based on the refinanced properties. This is going to be a fight." "Good, Taka," I said, surprising myself with the conviction in my voice. "Let them fight. I've spent 15 years avoiding conflict for the sake of peace. I'm done with that. If they want a war, I'll give them one." Because here's what Raymond didn't understand. I didn't build an empire by backing down. I didn't accumulate $180 million by being afraid of difficult battles. I got here by being smarter, more prepared, and more ruthless than anyone who underestimated me. And Raymond had spent our entire marriage underestimating me. This was going to be expensive, emotionally, definitely, financially, possibly, socially, absolutely. But it was also going to be honest. For the first time in 15 years, I was going to live in the truth instead of a comfortable lie. And maybe that was worth the cost. But I'll be honest with you. Sitting alone in that big house that night, I wondered if I'd made a mistake. Not in divorcing Raymond. That was absolutely the right choice. But in all the years before, in choosing someone who needed me to be smaller so he could feel bigger, in convincing myself that love meant accepting someone's limitations instead of expecting them to grow, in building walls so high around my success that I forgot how to let anyone see the woman underneath, because Raymond was wrong about a lot of things, but maybe he was right about one. I had been controlling, not with malice, but with money, because money was the language I spoke fluently, and I'd used it to solve every problem in our marriage without ever asking if that's what he needed. I'd bought his comfort instead of earning his respect. I'd funded his lifestyle instead of building partnership, and in doing so, I'd created the exact dynamic that made us both miserable. So yeah, I won that day. I watched them both leave in shame and confusion and pain. I protected my assets and my empire. I exposed every lie and defended myself with truth. But victories like that, they taste like ash. They feel like winning a war by burning down your own city. The question wasn't whether I'd made the right choice. The question was, what kind of woman was I going to be now that the choice was made? And sitting there in the ruins of my marriage, surrounded by expensive furniture in an expensive house that suddenly felt like a very beautiful prison, I honestly didn't know the answer. But I was about to find out. Because the real battle wasn't the divorce. The real battle was figuring out whether I'd built an empire at the cost of building a life, whether success and connection were mutually exclusive, or if I'd just been doing it wrong this whole time, and most terrifying of all, whether at 58, with $180 million and zero idea how to be vulnerable, I could learn to be a different kind of strong. You want to know what happened after they both walked out of my life? You think the story ends with me standing victorious in my empty house, surrounded by my fortune and my vindication? That's what I thought too. Turns out winning the battle doesn't mean you've won the war with yourself. The divorce took 6 months to finalize. 6 months of depositions and legal battles and watching Raymond's lawyer try desperately to find cracks in a prenup that was tighter than a bank vault. They fought. Oh, they fought hard. Claimed I'd coerced him into signing it. Claimed his mental state was compromised when he agreed to the terms. Claimed that 15 years of marriage entitled him to compensation for his contributions to my business success. Contributions that, when pressed for specifics, turned out to be attending a handful of networking events and offering unsolicited advice I never used. But here's the thing about building an empire. You learn to document everything. Every conversation, every decision, every signature. My lawyer presented evidence that Raymond had his own attorney review the prenup before signing it, that he'd taken 2 weeks to consider it, that he'd negotiated and won several concessions that protected his personal assets. There was no coercion, no confusion, just a man who'd agreed to terms when he thought he'd never need to face them. The judge ruled in my favor. Raymond got exactly what the prenup specified. His personal belongings, his car, the one he'd owned before we married, not the luxury vehicles I'd purchased, and the $50,000 in his personal account. Everything else stayed with me. The house, the portfolio, the entire empire I'd built before he existed in my life and maintained while he was busy spending it on other women. His lawyer tried to push for compensation for the refinanced properties, arguing that work done during the marriage created marital value. My lawyer destroyed that argument in under 10 minutes by presenting evidence that Raymond had zero involvement in any business decisions, no contracts signed, no negotiations conducted, no capital invested. He'd been a spectator to my success, not a participant, and spectators don't get a share of the winnings. The courtroom was half full the day the verdict came down. Word had gotten out about the case. The older businesswoman versus the younger husband who'd been living off her fortune. Some people came to support me. Others came because they couldn't resist the spectacle. I saw faces from the country club, colleagues from business deals, even a few reporters looking for a story about age and money and the messiness of modern relationships. When the judge announced the ruling, I felt nothing, not relief, not satisfaction, just a hollow acknowledgement that this chapter was finally closed. Raymond left the courthouse without looking at me, his face a mixture of rage and humiliation. I stayed behind, thanking my lawyer, shaking hands with people whose names I barely registered, playing the part of the composed victor even though I felt like I was moving underwater. That night, alone in my house, truly alone, for the first time in 15 years, I stood in my bedroom and cried, not for Raymond, not for the marriage, but for the version of myself who'd believed that success could buy safety, that if I was just strong enough, smart enough, successful enough, I'd never be vulnerable to the kind of pain my parents went through. I'd built an empire to protect myself, and in the process, I'd built a prison. The weeks that followed were strange. I went to work every day, closed deals, managed properties, attended meetings. On the surface, everything looked the same, but something fundamental had shifted. I kept catching myself reaching for my phone to text Raymond about something mundane, a funny thing that happened at work, a restaurant I wanted to try, before remembering he was gone. The habit of sharing your life with someone doesn't disappear just because they betrayed you. Diana came by often during those weeks. She'd show up with wine and takeout and force me to talk about something other than work. "You won," she kept saying. "Why do you look like you lost?" "Because winning doesn't feel like I thought it would," I admitted one night, 3 glasses of wine in and finally honest. I proved Raymond was a liar and a cheat. I protected my money. I exposed every ugly truth. But I'm still alone in a house that costs a fortune to heat, sleeping in a bed that feels too big, wondering if I'm going to die surrounded by my buildings and my bank statements and absolutely nothing else that matters. Diana was quiet for a long moment. Then she said something that cut right through me. "Claudette, you've spent 30 years building walls to keep pain out, but walls don't discriminate. They keep everything out, including the good stuff." I wanted to argue with her, wanted to defend my choices, my strategy, my careful construction of a life that couldn't be destroyed by someone else's weakness. But I couldn't, because she was right. I'd been so afraid of being hurt that I'd forgotten how to be open. So afraid of being used that I'd started evaluating every relationship like a business transaction. And Raymond, weak, dishonest Raymond, had been the perfect partner for that approach because he'd never challenged me to be anything more than successful. Then, about 2 months after the divorce was finalized, something unexpected happened. I ran into Amber. I was at a bookstore, one of those small independent places that somehow survived in the age of online shopping, looking for something to read that wasn't a business biography or market analysis. I was in the poetry section of all places when I heard a voice behind me. "Claudette?" I turned, and there she was, Amber, looking different somehow, less polished, more real. She was wearing jeans and a sweater instead of designer everything, her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, minimal makeup. She looked nervous. "I'm sorry," she said immediately. "I know you probably don't want to see me." "I can leave." "It's fine," I said, surprised by how much I meant it. "It's a public bookstore. We're allowed to coexist in a poetry section." She laughed, a small, genuine sound. "I didn't know you read poetry." "I'm trying to," I admitted, trying to be a person who does things besides work. It's not going well. I've been staring at the Rilke section for 10 minutes, and I have no idea what I'm looking at. She reached past me and pulled out a slim volume. "Start with this one, Letters to a Young Poet. It's accessible but not simplistic, good for people who are trying to understand themselves better." I took the book, studying her. "How are you?" "Getting by," she said. I moved back in with my sister, started therapy, deleted all my social media because I couldn't face explaining to everyone that my perfect relationship was actually me being conned by a middle-aged fraud. You? About the same, minus the sister and the social media, I said. Therapy mostly. Learning that being successful at business doesn't mean you're successful at being human. We stood there for a moment, two women who'd been collateral damage in the same man's ego crisis, and something passed between us that felt like understanding. I'm sorry, Amber said again, for what I said to you, for believing I was better than you when I was just younger and stupider, for being part of something that hurt you. I'm sorry too, I said, and I meant it. For judging you when we were both just trying to find something real in a world that makes that incredibly hard. She smiled, sad but genuine. For what it's worth, I reached out to Jake, the guy with the car dealerships. We're having coffee next week. Turns out he's been single for a year and still remembers me. So maybe there's hope for honest second chances. I hope it works out, I said. And I did, because Amber wasn't my enemy. She'd been another woman trying to survive in a system that tells us our value decreases with every year after 30. We'd both just made the mistake of thinking Raymond was the solution, instead of another symptom of the problem. She left, and I stood there holding the Rilke book, thinking about how strange life is, how the people who wound you can sometimes help you heal just by showing you what patterns you need to break. I bought the book, started reading it that night, and for the first time in months, I felt something other than tired. But the real turning point came about a week later. I was at that same bookstore. It had become a weird ritual going there once a week to buy books I wasn't entirely sure how to read, when I got into an argument with a stranger about architecture. He was maybe 60, silver-haired, wearing jeans and a faded button-down that suggested comfort over fashion. He'd made some comment about modern architecture being soulless, and I'd immediately disagreed. We spent 20 minutes debating the merits of form versus function, historical preservation versus adaptive reuse, whether beauty was inherent or contextual. He was smart, informed, passionate about his opinions, and completely unbothered by the fact that I disagreed with him on nearly every point. Marcus, he said finally, extending his hand. Marcus Webb. And you are someone who clearly knows way too much about building design to be a casual architecture fan. Claudette Brennan, I said, shaking his hand. Commercial real estate. I own a few buildings. A few buildings, he repeated, his eyes crinkling with amusement. That's like saying the ocean contains some water. I know who you are, Claudette. Your portfolio is kind of legendary in this city. I'm impressed you're even shopping at a small bookstore instead of having an assistant order from some exclusive catalog. I felt myself tense, waiting for the usual response. The attempt to pitch me an investment, the sudden interest in my money, the shift from person to opportunity. But Marcus just smiled and said, Want to grab coffee? I'd love to continue this argument in a place that serves caffeine. Coffee turned into 3 hours at a cafe down the street. I learned that Marcus was a retired high school English teacher who'd spent 35 years trying to convince teenagers that Shakespeare was relevant and poetry mattered. He owned a small bookshop a few blocks from where we'd met, the one I'd been visiting weekly without realizing it was his. He'd been divorced for 10 years, had 2 grown daughters he adored, and lived in a modest apartment above his store because he'd rather spend money on books than rent. I looked you up, he admitted over our second cup of coffee. After your divorce hit the news, not because I was interested in your money. I survived on a teacher's salary for 35 years. I think I can manage on a bookshop owner's income, but because I was curious about the woman who built an empire and still shows up to buy poetry on Tuesday afternoons. And what did you conclude? I asked, waiting for judgment. That you're probably lonely, he said simply. That success that size usually costs something personal, that you're trying to figure out who you are when you're not working, and that you argue about architecture with strangers because it's easier than talking about things that actually matter. I should have been offended. Instead, I laughed, actually laughed, for the first time in months. You're very direct. I'm 61 years old and I own a bookstore that barely breaks even, he said. I don't have time for anything but direct. So here's my question. Would you like to have dinner with me sometime? Not as a business opportunity or a networking event or whatever other transactional thing you're used to. Just dinner. 2 people, talking, seeing if they enjoy each other's company. I hesitated. Every instinct I'd developed over 30 years of building an empire screamed caution. This could be another con, another person who saw my net worth before they saw me, another Raymond in a different package. But then I thought about Diana's words, about walls that keep out the good stuff along with the bad, about the Rilke book in my bag that talked about living the questions. And I said yes. That was 4 months ago. Marcus and I have been seeing each other since. Slowly, carefully, 2 damaged people learning how to trust again. He insists on paying for things within his budget, even though my budget could buy his bookstore 100 times over. We argue about books and art and politics and whether coffee should be consumed black or with cream. He's never asked me for money or advice on investments or anything beyond my honest opinion on the novels he's thinking of stocking. Last week he came to see one of my properties, a converted warehouse I'd transformed into mixed-use space with retail on the ground floor and offices above. He walked through the building with genuine interest, asking questions about the design choices, the structural challenges, the vision I'd had for the space. And when we got to the top floor with the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, he said something that cracked me open. "This is what you do," he said quietly. "You take broken, abandoned things and you see what they could be. You see past the damage to the potential, and then you build it into something beautiful and functional and real." He turned to look at me. "I hope you can learn to do that for yourself, too." I'm trying. God, I'm trying. I'm learning that being vulnerable isn't the same as being weak, that letting someone contribute on their own terms isn't about the dollar amount. That partnership means showing up honestly, even when honesty makes you uncomfortable. That love at 58 looks different than love at 43, but different doesn't mean less. I still own my empire. I still close deals and manage properties and build wealth. But I'm also learning to build other things. Friendship with Diana that goes deeper than wine and commiseration. A tentative connection with Amber based on mutual understanding of what it means to survive a con. A relationship with Marcus that terrifies me because it asks me to show up as Claudette, not Claudette Brennan, the real estate mogul. And Raymond, I heard through mutual acquaintances that he's working as a car salesman now, living in a studio apartment, paying off the legal fees from our divorce battle with a payment plan that'll take him years. Part of me feels vindicated, but mostly I feel sad for him. Sad that he spent 15 years performing a version of success instead of building something real. Sad that his need to feel important was stronger than his ability to be honest. Sad that he destroyed something that could have been good if he'd just had the courage to show up as himself. I don't regret divorcing him. I don't regret exposing his lies or protecting my assets or any of it, but I do regret all the years I spent thinking that success was enough, that if I was just impressive enough, I'd be safe, that walls built from achievements were any different from walls built from fear. Here's what I've learned at 58, after building a fortune and losing a marriage, and starting over with a man who owns a bookstore and argues with me about poetry. Money can't protect you from heartbreak. Success can't guarantee happiness. And the things that make you powerful in business, control, strategy, keeping your cards close, those same things will kill your relationships if you let them. I'm not fixed. I'm not fully healed. I still wake up some mornings in my big house and feel the weight of all that empty space. I still struggle with letting Marcus pay for dinner with his teacher's pension when I could buy the restaurant. I still catch myself evaluating relationships like transactions, looking for the angle, waiting for the other shoe to drop. But I'm learning that being seen is scarier than being successful, that letting someone contribute means accepting that their contribution might look different than yours. That love isn't about finding someone who matches your net worth. It's about finding someone who matches your values, your honesty, your willingness to show up imperfectly. So that's my story, the woman who built an empire and almost lost herself in the foundation. the wife who got called a gold digger by her husband's mistress and used the truth as a weapon. The 58-year-old who's learning that it's never too late to tear down the walls you built to protect yourself and start building something that actually feels like a life. I'm Claudette Brennan. I own 18 buildings and I'm worth $180 million. And I'm finally learning that neither of those things defines me. They're just what I've done, not who I am. Who I am is still being written. And for the first time in 30 years, I'm excited to see what comes next. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever built walls so high that you kept out the people who could actually love you? Have you ever confused being strong with being closed off? Have you ever had to choose between protecting yourself and opening yourself, knowing that both choices come with risk? Drop a comment below and tell me your story, because I guarantee you're not alone in this. We're all out here trying to figure out how to be powerful without being isolated, how to be successful without being lonely, how to protect ourselves without building prisons. And if this story resonated with you, if you saw yourself in any part of Claudette's journey, do me a favor, hit that like button. Subscribe to this channel if you haven't already, because we're building a community of people who are done with pretty lies and ready for messy truths. Share this video with someone who needs to hear that it's never too late to start over. That success, without connection, is just expensive loneliness. That being 58 or 68 or 78 doesn't mean your story is over. It just means you've learned enough to write a better ending. I'm Claudette. This was my story, and I'll see you in the next one. Thank you for listening to my story.